heard a lot sort of underlying a huge number of the conversations today about the challenge of getting citizens ready to participate in this economy, particularly understanding coding and technology and really being prepared in 1,000 ways. But this idea of education and education for the jobs that are going to exist is really, really urgent. We also had an extraordinary session after lunch in here on expanding the diversity in technology itself and in the industry and thinking more broadly about inclusion. And actually, a lot of that discussion applies to any industry. Brian was on that session. And let me just introduce the two guys that are up here with me. Brian Ford is, in this White House had a CTO for the first time, right? Mm-hmm. That was the first time there was ever a CTO of the United States. And now we have people in the White House who have titles like Special Advisor to the CTO for Mobile and Social Innovation, which is his title, although it doesn't begin to describe all the things he does. But that, to me, is very promising, that we've gotten to that level of understanding, at least at the executive branch. And so Brian works in the White House on this tech stuff, and I'm going to ask him to describe specifically how you're thinking about training as soon as we get into the discussion. Zach Sims is one of the great entrepreneurs of New York right now, a very young CEO of Codecademy, which is a company that does online tools for learning about coding and programming and technology. He dropped out of Columbia to start that company, what, about 4 years ago? 3 years ago. So he's gone a long way since then. And actually, it's a Union Square Ventures portfolio company, which was Albert Wenger's company. So Brian, start out by telling me, what is it that you are most concerned about when it comes to this issue of training the future citizens and workers of the country?
Sure. So, one of the big issues that we've seen is there's a widely cited statistic that says there's 1.4 million IT opportunities or jobs that are going to be created by 2020. We're only going to have 400,000 computer science graduates who are going to be able to fill those. So what do we do to fill the other 1 million job opportunities that are going to be created? And so one of the exciting things that we've seen from Zach's platform, Codecademy, and all of the coding boot camps that are popping up and all the other accelerated learning programs, not only in coding, but in network and sysadmin, cybersecurity, and even tech support has lucrative opportunities as well, so that you can be upskilled between 3 months to 2 years, and you don't need a STEM undergraduate degree to get a STEM-type job. And that's a really important distinction for us, because if you look at us competitively as a country compared to other countries, you've got across the world, 21% of folks across Asia are graduating with engineering degrees, 12% in Europe, and only 4.5% in America.
21% of college graduates in Asia are coming out with engineering degrees,
yep,
compared to 4% here.
Yep.
Oh, that is a bracing statistic.
Right. And if you look at historically, 30 years ago, US, Japan, and China each had about 70,000 engineers coming out. I think most recently the US was down to 60K and China was up to 600K.
Per year?
Yeah.
600,000 engineers per year being graduated in China. That's 10x what we're producing.
Yeah, so there's a huge opportunity for us to really become competitive by leveraging.
That's a positive way to put it, an opportunity to become competitive.
I would say folks.
There is a risk of serious falling behind if we're not already behind. Right. I mean, luckily we have a pretty creative tech community here. But I mean, is it for you, when you look at it in the White House and when the president looks at it, and Megan Smith, the new CTO, is the view that basically we are essentially training, we need to think about preparing the next generation of Americans to think differently about tech, or is it simply we need bunch more coders?
Well, I would say, what does the knowledge of coding and other skills unlock the ability to do, right? It unlocks your ability to be more creative, unlocks your ability to jobs that allow more flexibility. Megan has a line where she says, why don't we call it the Department of Labor and Talent, right? How do we create new sets of talent that can access all of the jobs that we access where we're super passionate and allow us to really apply our creativity, because that's what coding really allows you to do. Be more creative. It doesn't box you into one standard solution. It allows you to invent the solution.
Okay. lot of things to drill down on as we go forward. Zach, so quickly talk about what Code Academy has done so far, where you're doing it, and where you want to take it.
So when we started Code Academy 3 years ago, I think we had two contrarian theses that have actually proven to be true in the 3 years since we started the company. The first was that programming was not just for programmers. So this was before Mark Andreessen had written his essay, Software is Eating the World. We theorized, not just a programming skill set wouldn't be relevant only for programmers, it'd be relevant for anyone and everyone. And I think that's proven itself out, not just in the BLS numbers that Brian cited, but also if you look at every industry now, entry-level jobs in ad sales in some industries require a basic understanding of the programmatic ads that are being sold by those same people. Journalism is being changed by technology as well. So we're seeing every industry be changed by technology. And the second was that, as a corollary to the first, that schools across the world would realize this change and they would change their curriculums to start teaching people 21st century skills and aptitude in computer science and programming. And so we've seen both of those really play themselves out. And what that's meant for Code Academy is that as we built a really easy-to-use platform that makes it easy for anyone to start learning and to learn by doing manner online, more than 25 million people around the world have taken Code Academy courses.
25 million.
More than 25 million. And what that means to us is, again, this interest is far beyond what anyone would have predicted 3 years ago. And programming is becoming kind of fundamental literacy. It's becoming literacy for the workers of the 21st century, but also for the students of the 21st century. So we work with governments across the world. Around 25% of our learners are in school and under the age of 21. So we work with the UK government, for instance. Every primary and secondary school student this year will take a programming course. Every school in France will have a programming course this year. Every student in Estonia learns to program on Code Academy. We think there are a lot of other countries that are helping to prepare their students for the 21st century, and we're looking forward to seeing the US kind of take similar steps.
Okay, I want to get to that. There's more dichotomy there than you sort of, you're implying it, but you're not hitting it too hard yet. But it goes back to that 600,000 to 60,000 point. But the thing about Code Academy is anybody can go there and just start taking classes. And it's sort of a help each other kind of peer-to-peer system that you've built that is very, very easy to use. I know that's that for a fact. But you're also working with institutions wherever you can to sort of scale it to reach a larger number of people. Okay. I wanted to just ask the audience, how many people in here feel that you'd say you can code? Okay. That's quite a few. That's nice to know. How many people who can't code wish they could code? That's an even larger number, and I'm not surprised to see that. So, you've got an opportunity that's clearly going to be growing, and Union Square Ventures is probably going to make a lot of money. But this thing about the U.S. being different really worries me, and I think it goes right to the heart of why we're having Techonomy Detroit. We care about Detroit, but we also always said this conference was really about American economic issues in a time when technology is transforming everything. So what you're saying is the government of Estonia is working with you centrally to make Code Academy available to every student in Estonia. And in the UK, maybe they're not doing it in every school, but the government has mandated that every student will learn programming, and many of those schools are using Code Academy, and similarly in France, right?
Yep.
Now, so those are 3 countries where every student is being exposed, at least to some degree, to programming. Now, I'm curious, if you wouldn't mind just estimating.
Sure.
What percentage of, say, K through 12 American students would you guess are today being exposed to programming in some form or fashion?
I don't have that number, but
It's got to be tiny, though, right?
But what I think was important to think about is timelines.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think we're actually talking about 2 different timelines, and I think it's important to distinguish them. So the one timeline is thinking about, this is the President's Council of Advisors of Science and Tech said we need 1 million additional STEM undergraduates 10 years from now. But we also need 1 million additional IT-ready workers by 2020.
Even beyond the million programmers.
Right, so what's important to distinguish is, what you're describing, what other countries are doing is thinking about it from the K through 12, which we are as well, and we have separate programs for that. But what's also important to think about is how we're going to train the workers today for the jobs that exist today in the next few years.
Well, I think that's a fantastic way to think about it, but I also think it is critical to recognize that we don't have a national understanding of these issues. And I actually would ask you, I think Obama and the administration have shown a pretty good understanding that tech is changing the world, right? Not as good as I would like, but pretty good. Yeah. Congress, on the other hand, seems completely, totally clueless. I mean, the number of Congress people that could even participate in the discussions we've had today is probably 15 or 20% at best. I mean, would you disagree with that?
I'm not going to comment on Congress or the executive branch or the differences between the two. But I do want to point out that the National Science Foundation has worked really hard to update the computer science AP curriculum that is in all schools throughout high schools.
Well, we love that. I love that. But I just think, it's so good that Zach's company exists and some of these tools are emerging, the MOOCs and a lot of other online tools, because certainly, you're not the only company or organization that's building online education that can take people bring people out of the 20th century, so to speak. But it is worrisome that, and I love what you're doing, and there's no question you're doing the right stuff. But I think we need to be alarmed, in my opinion. Do you think we need to be alarmed?
I think the bright spot is that from a consumer perspective, so 70% of Codecademy's learners are outside the US, but the largest country that uses Codecademy is still the United States. Right?
Good.
So we have the largest sheer number of users that are learning to program in the world are in the US. And that to us is still meaningful. So I think what Brian is talking about is change in a K-12 system is always difficult, right?
Yeah.
I think that's what you're referencing.
Yeah.
But what we're seeing is consumers understand the gap between education and labor. Companies and employers understand the gap between education and labor. And we hope that by providing them with the resources to upskill and fill that gap, that people will vote with their feet. They'll take courses on Codecademy. They'll find those modern jobs.
Well, it seems like a no-brainer if we can see these jobs coming into existence and they're not being filled. And I think any tech company will tell you it's hard to find people for a lot of the positions they have, even today. And I don't think the average high school and college student, well, they're starting to realize it. In some places, they realize it more than others. Mm-hmm. In fact, I just read, it, again, Harvard, which has come up on stage today, the biggest class in the Harvard freshman year now is computer science. For the first time ever. It used to be economics, and with this incoming freshman class this year, it became computer science. So that's great, but those are the richest, smartest kids in America. So it starts somewhere. That's got to spread more broadly. One of the things, Zach, that I wanted to ask you is, because you think so hard and you do so much in sort of looking at how we can change this stuff at scale, right? And we've heard a lot today about the sharing economy and crowdsourcing and crowdfunding, there's a lot of things happening that are the maker movement that are really exciting new trends that are potentially economically very important. But my observation has been that many of those things require a fairly sophisticated understanding of what's going on, even to be involved in, right? So do you think that you guys could help with that too? I mean, do you think of broadening what Codecademy does over time so that it's more than just coding, but also kind of awareness of the changing nature of the economy?
Absolutely. I think we think of coding as digital literacy, but I think there are many other parts to the equation of what digital literacy means.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, Codecademy exists to teach people the skills they need to find jobs, and one component of that are the skills to understand the world we live in. I think you don't want to just hire someone who's able to sit in front of a computer and write code for you, but doesn't understand the underlying logic that's powering everything. And that's kind of the first step of what we do oftentimes with students on Codecademy is they're learning, these are the fundamental building blocks of programming, and this is how they play a role in your everyday life. And that's, I think, the basic fluency that we should all have, regardless of whether or not we learn how to program, should understand how our world works. And as software starts to eat the world, it becomes ever more important.
Well, and Brian, I know one of the things you're doing, aside from just trying to raise awareness that these jobs are there and we aren't currently prepared to fill them, is, you were eloquent on the inclusion session, getting a wider range of young people into these jobs, because let's face it, coding has predominantly been a white guy thing. They was talking like programming is a big trend that was discussed in the inclusion session, and if it's just programming, it's not going to help the country nearly as much. So talk about some of the things that the White House has done, because I know you've got some very specific things that you've been involved in.
Yeah, so we started the White House Tech Inclusion Initiative, which back in 2012, where we hosted both a workshop to brainstorm some of the ways that we can improve tech inclusion, but that was for STEM undergraduates. And so now we're starting to think about ways that we can go beyond STEM undergraduates and have tech inclusion happen via the coding boot camps and Codecademy and others. And I think the opportunity there is not only putting the burden on the educational system here in the US, but also thinking about what employers can do. Is there a restriction that on job opportunities that don't require four-year degrees that still have four-year degrees? Is there an awareness by the hiring managers about coding boot camps, which we just did a roundtable with some last week, and there wasn't. It was
There was not an awareness.
There was not an awareness of coding boot camps at the hiring manager level for some companies, and recognizing how valid that is. And so there's opportunities for improvement on one, getting the information out to the right communities about the opportunities that exist in the tech industry, but also for the mayors to know in cities across America that all of these job opportunities, these IT job opportunities, not just in the tech industry, but in the finance, health, and other industries, exist and are significant. Two, what are tech companies and other companies doing to improve inclusion by making sure that they do coding boot camps, but they can do other things in lieu of a four-year degree. The other piece is financing, right? It's really challenging to get capital for something that is unaccredited, and coding boot camps and others are unaccredited. So what can we do at the federal level to think about that? And what can the private sector do to allow for loans for folks who may not have the best credit score?
Like a new kind of student loan for this explicit.
Right? That could come from the private sector, because quite frankly, the private sector is the one who actually loses out on the most amount of money by having significant delays in getting their jobs filled, right? That's lost cost and productivity. So there needs to be an incentive on their end, both at how they're looking at hiring, but also opportunities for financing that education as well.
And you also had a White House Tech Inclusion Summit.
We did have the Tech Inclusion Summit to address some of the issues that were identified, including mentorship, which is really important. And so there's an initiative that started called US 2020, which challenges tech companies for 20% of their staff to mentor in STEM-type programs for 20 hours a year throughout the country, which has been really amazing.
Fantastic. I invite anybody to come to the mics if you have comments or questions. I want to ask you two things make sure we get to these before we go. First of all, you guys have worked, one of the reasons we put you guys on stage together is because you've gotten to know each other working on projects together. So talk a little bit about what you've done together and the kinds of things you'd like to do together in future.
I think the key for us at Codecademy is really enabling what Brian has talked about so far, which is scaling up a workforce in the US that has the skills they need for these modern jobs. And so watching the White House get involved and try to really raise awareness of both the gap between education and labor, and also the solutions that exist to fill that. We're happy to help out however we can, and I think we will continue to train consumers and hope to work with government as well.
Yeah, there's a real opportunity for us to act as a convener. The White House is a great place to meet, and so we want to open it up to all kinds of coding boot camps and training programs like Zach's to come in, and employers as well, to kind of educate and make commitments like we did with the Tech Inclusion Summit, but continuing to drive that as a country to make sure, one, that they're aware of the different gaps that exist in employment and where the opportunities that they can make commitments to change. This is a playbook that we, as unique as the federal government, can do, and also aggregate demand, right? So you can imagine a mayor identifies local problems, but when you aggregate cities across the country, then it raises the attention, and you can get national commitments, which could be real opportunities.
Well, and as you heard earlier, we want to do a Techonomy policy event in Washington. I want to continue this discussion there. But I guess before we go to the question, there's at least one person, two people over there, so we'll get to those. But I want to ask what's sort of like the dream scenario question, right? We're here in Detroit. It's a predominantly black city with a lot of relatively poorly educated people because the schools here stink, right? So the dream scenario would be, how do you get some of these young people from where they are today, the ones that are here now, into the economy with these tools, what is the chance, do you think, and what are the means that we might be able to do that? I mean, either one of you, I'd just love to hear something optimistic about that, because I really think we've got to find a way to do that.
I mean, I think we focus on providing the resources and then hopefully enabling anyone who has access to really take action and change their lives through learning these skills. I think the challenge fundamentally of what you just mentioned is that oftentimes there are prerequisite skills, right? There are literacy issues, and with a school system that's fundamentally broken, whether Detroit's or somewhere else, you have other things to focus on before you can get to the level of worrying about employability. So for us, we want to provide access to anyone and everyone, and we have. We will continue to and enable anyone to learn these skills. I think it's the role of the school systems oftentimes to provide the literacy prerequisites that allow people to dream at this level and to access material like Codecademy.
I'm incredibly optimistic because I first came to Detroit 10 months ago, and I remember walking with Beth Niblock and 4 other top municipal CIOs to the mayor's office when she was still the CIO of the city of Louisville. And coming out of that 2-day exercise, we were trying to identify as part of the White House revitalization effort with the city of Detroit, what a 21st century government in Detroit looks like. And we were going to prepare a plan. And several months later, 10 months later, we see Beth Niblock, who's one of the top municipal CIOs in the country, who has the full backing of her mayor and is in full progress attacking the 7-step plan because she has a mayor who fully supports her and wants her to succeed because he wants the city to succeed. And so this mayor has done an incredible job of taking ideas and turning them into action. And I think you've seen some of the results already with Beth. And so anything that we can put that does have an opportunity to make real change, and seeing a city that's so resilient and a culture that's so supportive and businesses and philanthropists that have really got behind this I actually think Detroit has a better chance than other cities because there's such a strong community here of support.
Yeah, there is some momentum that's really tangible, and it's wonderful to see. Over here, who's first? And please, succinct, and let's go quickly through several people.
So I'm Tim Thomasma. I had a career in IT, and as late as like 5 years ago, I was really hearing the message, hey, don't learn to program because we got people in India to do that. We'll get freelancers from offshore, and there's no career path. Why is it now in America, it seems like we really have a huge demand for programmers that are American, that are here in person? Is it happening, and is that going to be real, and is that going to be something that's going to continue?
That's a great question. I like the way you put it.
I think it'll continue to be real. I think it's hard to find a great company that has been built on outsourcing. A great technology company, when the product is built outside of the U.S. and an executive team is in the U.S., for instance. I know a lot of technology investors hesitate to fund companies that can't build a technology team. I think the quality of the product is just not as good, and that doesn't have to do with where it's being programmed. It just has to do with kind of everyone being in one location, building a really cohesive team, and I don't think that's really changing.
Any thoughts?
No, I agree with Zach.
Okay, good. Let's get somebody else there. Got a question? Yes, please. Or comment? Oh, and good. We'll get to you. Go ahead.
All right, I'll go first.
I saw you first. Sorry. Then we'll get to you.
My name's Tom. I'm from SkySpecs. And first an observation and then a question leading into it. I used to teach a intro programming course at the University of Michigan while I was doing my master's degree. And I was always amazed at the gap between the brightest students and then those that were first being introduced to programming. And then every semester, it sequentially got worse and worse. The gap gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it perpetuates itself because that gap being so large is intimidating for new students that come into a place like the University of Michigan and realize, wow, these guys already know 5 different programming languages. So the question is, what can be done at the high school or even K through 8 level in order for us to level the playing field for all of these kids coming into college that are trying to learn how to program?
You know what, rather than answer that, I'm going to do this trick of several questions, and we can kind of address them as you choose. Please tell us what you have on your mind.
My name's Sachin. I'm coming from the healthcare side of things. So throughout this whole conference, I've been trying to find applications for solutions for problems in healthcare. And I'm just wondering not only from a policy perspective, but also from an entrepreneurial perspective, but how is programming and solutions that are programming-based being applied to healthcare problems, especially with the explosion of data that's happening now that the Human Genome Project has been completed?
Yeah, and some of the new Apple products could make that an even more interesting question. Behind you, you want to come up and quickly tell us what your question is?
Sure. My interest is in K through 12, and from your vantage point, I'm interested in how much uptake there is, either with Code Academy or with other products, in the K through 12 area, and maybe what challenges you see there as well, trying to, move that ball forward.
So K through 12, healthcare, and the gap between the best programmers and everybody else. Any thoughts?
So with the gap, what I understand is, we spoke about this earlier with Maria Claway and what she's done at Harvey Mudd. So she actually takes some of those best students and she actually puts them in different classes or actually makes them mentors to other, so that it's not a threatening experience, but it's an opportunity for better engagement and collaboration. So there are some ways, and I think she's starting to work with other universities to replicate some of her processes, which has, I think, grown to 50% women in computer science, which is really impressive.
But I think it is changing the format that is the most important thing, as Brian mentioned. I remember my introductory computer science class at Columbia. I took one class. Professor stood up on the first day. There were 300 people in the room and told us that more than 30% of the people in the class would fail. We'd spend more than 30 hours a week doing the homework, and it might be rewarding if we made it to the end. Needless to say, I was not so encouraged by that, right? So I think as people like Marie at Harvey Mudd try to change that, you'll find more groups of people who are comfortable with a level playing field.
Yeah, Harvey Mudd's notable because now over 40% of all the computer science graduates are women, so they've really done a great job broadening the base. And any thoughts on healthcare or K through 12? We talked a little bit about K through 12 already.
So on the K through 12 front, we work with government when we're asked. So that's what we do outside of the US. As a majority, departments for education will contact us and say, how do we implement programs across our country? And really what's appealing to us there is scale. We're able to work with a nation or a state and get millions of students on the platform. Whereas in the US, it's a lot harder. We have to go district by district, and the flows and time spans that we deal with in different countries really vary. So it's not just the US that has a longer time span. We're seeing working with districts in other countries too. There's a 3 to 5 year decision cycle for how do we run a pilot as to whether or not we even teach this. Then once we decide to teach it, how are we teaching it?
Also, the thing you said about it being considered science, just quickly say that.
Yeah, so actually a majority of US states still, if I'm not wrong, don't consider computer science a science for the purpose of graduation requirements and consider it the same as an elective, like an art or a music. So I think the first step in the US is changing that, and then you get to the stage where computer science actually is a required class. So there's definitely room.
Any closing thoughts, Brian?
I think this is going to be a community-based solution. This isn't just the federal government. This isn't just Code Academy. This is going to require employers and local leaders and mentors. And so what I really want to invite you guys into is to the White House process. And so if you do have any offers for support or new ideas, we're here to take them and integrate them and work collaboratively with you to be able to address this.
Well, thank you both for being part of what